It's nice to be here with you this afternoon. I'm really excited about sharing with you the Rebuilding Blocks to Healing, Dr. Bruce Fisher's foundational program, the foundation for all his work in the divorce recovery arena. You know, it was in 1977, as Leanne mentioned, that I took the class from Dr. Fisher. And I found that through this process, what was called the educational model, helping people deal with their emotional issues and work through those issues in an educational setting, it was not only groundbreaking when Dr. Fisher really accelerated it using the Rebuilding program, but I think it's become the most effective way for individuals to work on their issues. I found in the 10-week program, and I'll describe that a little bit later, that people grow a tremendous amount, much more so than they would, I think, in 10 weeks of regular therapy. So I'm glad to have you here to listen to this. I really want you to get the message of what this kind of growth is all about. And as the title is, it is the Rebuilding Blocks to Healing. Not just healing from relationship loss, but healing from any kind of crisis, any kind of transition in your life. This process is applicable to all of that. Many individuals have taken the class because of loss through death. And many individuals take the class because they've not been married, but they've experienced an emotional divorce. So I want you to come with me on this journey of the Rebuilding Blocks to Healing. Dr. Fisher began this work in his doctoral dissertation in 1976 when he got his doctorate in education. And he's updated these rebuilding blocks several times since then. It's the foundation for his rebuilding seminar, as I will talk about. And over 600,000 people worldwide have taken this program. It's quite amazing. And his book, Rebuilding When Your Relationship Ends, which is now in its third edition, has touched close to 1 million people, at least in copies sold. And if you know anybody who's been through the Rebuilding program and looked at their book, it's not dog-eared just because of them reading it. They've passed it on to friends and other friends, and it gets all marked up. And pretty soon it's, you owe me another book. So many more than 1 million people have read that book and experienced this work. It's amazing that it's out there in 18 languages now and continuing to grow. I think we added, 2 or 3 this year. So. And as I mentioned before, I want you to keep in mind that this model of growth and recovery is applicable to any relationship-ending crisis, not just a legal divorce. And that's one of the things that I think that people forget when they take a look at what they call the divorce statistics. Because people get into relationships very casually, very easily. They give their heart away on so many occasions and find that the investments they made were not good ones. And so when those relationships end, it's very painful. And going through this process is the same for all. It's actually quite disheartening to read about how many teenagers, even early teens, start getting involved in, for them, heavy-duty relationships. So by the time they're in their early 20s, they've been through several emotional divorces. In fact, I think one of the life-giving things about Dr. Fisher's program is that it's something that both parents and children can share when they're dealing with, as a family, the transition of divorce. It's one of the best ways for the healing to be there for the family. So I want to take you on this journey, the journey from fear to freedom. You know, at this time when your relationship is ending and you find that perhaps so much of yourself is laying scattered out all over the floor, and there's so much pain, you feel like you've been totally ripped open. This is a time when you can stop and re-examine what your life is made of. This is a time in which, as you pull those different pieces back into yourself, you can decide, how much of this do I want? What do I want to let go? What do I want to create that's different, that's new? And I think one of the genius of Dr. Fisher's work is that in these 19 rebuilding blocks, he's laid out so many of those issues that people find scattered out when their relationship ends. So we're going to go from fear to freedom. We're going to learn what those steps are. We're going to learn how to take what may be stumbling blocks and turn them into rebuilding blocks. But before we talk about fear, we need to talk about the actual first step. And here it is. Look at that. First you look at that and it seems like there's nothing there. But that's the actual first step. Because when you really get into the step into looking at loss, for most people it begins with denial. You know, if you ignore the problems, maybe they'll go away. I don't want to look at it. And my relationship isn't ending. I think perhaps the premier example of someone stuck in denial is Miss Havisham out of Charles Dickens' book, Great Expectations. If you recall, 20 years after her marital day, when she was supposed to have been married, and he left, he didn't come to the ceremony, she's still wearing the rags of her wedding dress. The wedding cake is sitting there rotting on the table. And she's stuck. She's stuck because she's living in denial. And I think one of the things about this process that's so important to understand is that time does not heal these wounds. In fact, if anything else, time can mask you from the true pain and a source of hurt in that wound. It's as if you cut your hand and then the skin heals over, but the abscess grows inside. And I've had many people in the 20 years I've taught rebuilding find that it wasn't until 6, 7, 8 years after their divorce that they realized they were stuck. They were stuck when their next relationship ended. And they thought, you know, I never dealt with that first relationship. So we have to get beyond denial. It is a natural first step. But just like, for example, if you hit your thumb with a hammer and it hurts and then there's a numbness, that numbness goes away because physically the pain needs to come back to help you understand where the hurt is, how bad it is, to help you heal it. So the first step here is denial, and then moving on denial to what Dr. Fisher called the acceptance of the ending of the relationship. Acceptance doesn't mean that it's okay that it happened. It means this is the reality. And it hurts, but I've got to deal with it. Usually then when you do that, it opens up the door and here comes all the emotions. And for many people, it's fear. The fear comes flowing out. Fear has been called false expectations about reality or false evidence appearing real. See, we're not talking about the fear that's there when, for example, you're walking along a trail and all of a sudden you see a snake moving over the trail and you're scared and you jump back. That's almost a physiological reaction. It's not the fear that a person may have when they wake up in the middle of the night and they smell smoke and their fire alarm is going off and you know you need to just get out the window right away. See, that kind of fear is energizing, helps you move to protect yourself. We're talking here about the fear where people get stuck and think, things are so painful now, it's never going to change. The fear that my life is totally ruined and it will be that way forever. And that's what I mean when I say false evidence appearing real or false expectations about reality. Take a look at what's happening now. Don't judge the future by the present. Understand that the fear that you're feeling about this hurt lasting forever can generate great energy inside of you so that you can move beyond not only the fear, but deal with the reality of the ending of your relationship. So see fear now as a motivating factor. Those things that we are afraid of or have fear about have much to teach us. And when you stop and take a look at it, as we will through the rest of these rebuilding blocks, and you learn those lessons, then you can start the healing and start moving on in your life. What was it that Franklin Roosevelt said? We have nothing to fear but fear itself. It's being stuck in the fear that is the problem, not the fear itself. It's being stuck in it. So let's learn from it so we can move through it. Well, now this next rebuilding block is an interesting one. Dr. Fisher called it adaptation. Adaptation is a way of looking at and understanding what are the patterns that you brought into the relationship. You see, divorce is not only an emotional experience. Divorce is an experience of great learning. No one gets married to get divorced. No one walks down the aisle to decide, I'm now going to go to court. Unless, of course, you're just trying to get a lot of money out of somebody. And that happens. But the issue is that we bring so much, what we bring as a dowry to our marriage, both men and women, are the experiences and what we've learned and who we are out of our families of origin and our previous relationships. And typically what we bring are the ways we've adapted to the relationships we've experienced. Now, overwhelmingly what we find in the rebuilding seminar is that people often bring those patterns and that forecast a relationship that's not going to work. So you see it here. You see some people are over-responsible, some people are under-responsible. Some people act like the parent, I'm going to tell you what to do, you're going to do things this way, and this way, because controlling things was their way of surviving in their families of origin or how they related in other relationships. And other people are like, fine, take care of me. I'm not going to do anything. You know, it's all up to you. And they're like little kids. And what happens? The parents always wind up with the kids. You see, you can't have a kid without a parent without a kid. Notice in that situation, nobody is a grown-up and an adult. So what many people find when their relationships end is that it's not just the problems of their partner that caused it, but just like when you point at somebody, all the rest of the fingers point back at you. Gee, what did I bring to the situation that was a problem? So it's a great learning experience. So that those who find that their attitude of being over-responsible inevitably is going to cause them to try and find somebody else and be with somebody who's under-responsible. So if I don't want to be with somebody who's like a little kid and who's under-responsible, I need to start trying to take care of everybody. Maybe I need to start taking care of myself. When you start changing, understanding and changing those patterns, amazing things happen. Same thing for the under-responsible. I'm tired of people telling me what to do all the time. I'm tired of always having somebody who wants to control me. I'm tired of people treating me like a kid. Of course, the answer to that is, maybe it's time to grow up. And when you do that, wow, you find other people who are grown up. The parents and the children types fall away. What I like about this rebuilding block is that when you understand those patterns, it has a tendency to dispel any of that denial you've been carrying around. Because what you do is you go, wow, there are real good reasons why I'm sitting in this chair hearing this talk because my relationship ended. And what Bruce Fisher always used to say, the rebuilding seminar won't save this marriage, but it can save your next one if you learn from what happened. And that's what understanding your adaptation cycles can help you do. Well, now we're back to feelings again. You know, when your relationship ends, it's a mixture of confused thoughts and all these emotions. And like I say, we're picking them up one by one to understand them. So let's take a look at loneliness. Loneliness is kind of a unique emotion. You think about it. If you feel lonely for part of a day, you feel like it's going to be that way for the whole day. You know? If you feel lonely through all of Saturday, the whole weekend's shot. If you feel lonely through the weekend, and the whole next week is miserable. And by the end of that week, you decide, you know, no one's going to ever know if I live or die. They're only going to find out who I am by my dental records sometime down the line. Loneliness has that quality to it. And yet loneliness is a call to us. It's a call to us to understand ourselves better. The problem is that people spend so much time trying to find someone else to validate them that they forget to validate themselves. I can remember after my divorce, and I'll reenact this here for you, okay? I was pacing back and forth in my tiny apartment, about 1/1000th the size of this room, about the size of this rug, okay? And that's only a slight exaggeration, believe me. So, and it was furnished in early divorce, you know, a card table, folding chairs. So I'm pacing back and forth, and I basically cut myself off from family and friends. And I was walking back and forth saying, I'm lonely, I'm lonely, I'm lonely. And I have no idea how long I did that. I did that, however, until I heard somebody talking. Somebody was talking to me. I said, well, who's that talking? Who's that person saying I'm lonely? And I realized, oh my God, that's me. Somebody I had not thought of in all this time. Somebody I'd totally disregarded. Because now I didn't have a spouse, now I didn't have friends, and of course I was responsible for cutting myself off from those people. That helped me stop and take the next step to what we call aloneness. I learned to start developing the relationship with myself. Who am I? Who do I want to be? What do I enjoy doing just for me? I play the French horn, and I used to go up in the mountains and just play the horn up there. Nobody else around, and hear it echo, you know. I always wondered if I could get an elk to come by, and then I thought, no, that's probably not a good idea. You know, that could be a problem. Or it's like going to a movie by yourself. You always want to see this movie, but it's like, you know, this was some years ago, right? You didn't have DVDs or even videotapes then, so I guess I'm dating myself. But now I want to see this movie. There's nobody to go with. I'm going to do it myself. So I go to the movie, I sit down. It's like, hurry up, turn the lights down because everybody's looking at me because I'm the only person here by myself, so I thought. Well, then the lights go down, the movie goes on, and I'm watching it and enjoying it. And when I went home, I realized, gosh, I don't have anybody there to argue with me about my interpretation of the movie. I can just enjoy it for what I wanted it to be. That's what I mean about aloneness. And it was from that place of understanding who I am and what I needed and wanted that I was in a much better place to reach out to other people, to what we call all wholeness. I could choose to have people in my life, one person, a group, whatever, because I didn't need to have people in my life. That's an entirely different way of looking at it. And that's just one of the gifts that healing from your relationship loss can give you. Well, now let's talk about friends. Talk about friends. What happens when a relationship ends? People go tell their friends, especially their married friends. What do the married friends do? They often go, oh, really? Oh, I can't talk to you right now. Because it's like all of a sudden, well, if you're separating and getting a divorce, that may be catching. I don't want to catch it. Or maybe the friends just back up because they don't want to choose sides, so they choose not to be with anybody. And that's painful. That hurts. And it's important to recognize that, yeah, it's an awkward situation for those folks. That's why it's also important for you to start building a whole different support group of people who understand what relationship loss is all about. But more importantly than that, the whole idea of friendship is the vital foundation for any healthy love relationship. And when I say love relationship, and I'm not just talking about adult to adult, but with family, with friends, with anybody. Having a friendship. Sharing with each other and being with each other because it's out of choice, it's out of mutual desire and mutual activities that you enjoy together. And of course, to be a friend, to have a friend, you need to be a friend. And so one of the things you can learn during your relationship loss is what friendship is all about, what that means. So to be a friend with yourself means that you keep commitments for yourself. It means that you care for yourself physically, okay, whether that's diet or exercise. It means you care for yourself emotionally by understanding and allowing yourself to express your feelings appropriately. It means caring for yourself intellectually, being excited about new ideas, acting on some of the thoughts and beliefs that you really want to carry out. Learn to be a friend with yourself. And in caring for yourself, that will resonate with other people who can truly care about you. And then when you're connecting with folks who are able to do that, then you find way beyond a relationship loss situation that you've learned a valuable tool to carry you through the rest of your life. One of the things, I think it was Merle Shane, I forget in one of her books, she talked about how she brought as a dowry to her love partner her friendships, because her friendships helped make her who she was at that time. Well, it begins with ourselves. And then from there, many wonderful things can happen. Okay. Here's the final rebuilding block on the row on the bottom. And this is, I think, one of Dr. Fisher's most fun blocks that he liked to talk about. Because the emotions when relationships end range in many ways. But almost everybody feels some degree of guilt and some degree of rejection. But it depends on, as Dr. Fisher used to say, whether you're a dumper or a dumpee, what kind of emotion you're going to have. In fact, as I recall, one of the early edition of Rebuilding, that chapter started out with dumpers 1, dumpies 0. And that's a good reading for how dumpers and dumpies seem to feel and relate to each other. Okay, so let me define those and talk about that and how they do with rejection and guilt. So here you have the dumper. The dumper is the person who leaves the relationship. And the dumper often talks like this. I'm sorry, this isn't working for me. I need to go. I'm feeling trapped and suffocated. Goodbye. And there they go. They're off and running. And often the dumpers will feel more guilt than rejection because as they leave, they see their partners in so much pain about what's going on. But they still go out the door. Now, as you can imagine, dumpies are over here feeling all that rejection. Oh, please don't leave me. I'll do anything. I'll do anything. I'll change. Just tell me what to do. but don't leave me. And they're feeling all that rejection. Now, I imagine for some of you that sounds very familiar. We find that in the rebuilding program, it's usually at least 2 or 3 to 1 dumpees more than dumpers. In fact, sometimes I've talked about dumpers feeling guilt, and I'll have a dumpee in the back of the room go, "Good, hope they feel a lot of guilt." But you know, there's another dimension to this, and this other dimension is even more important because it really speaks to the responsibility and healing around the attitudes and behaviors of dumpers and dumpees, as well as the feelings of rejection and guilt. So I need to talk to you now about good dumpers and bad dumpers, good dumpees and bad dumpees. And so I'm sorry I'm being really prescriptive about this, but bear with me. So a good dumper is somebody who, after working really hard in the relationship, talking, sharing, maybe getting counseling, struggling with making the relationship work with their own ideals and their goals, and still comes to the same conclusion. It's not working for me, it's not healthy, I'm not happy. If it's not working for me, it can't work for us. It can't be good for anybody. And so they decide to leave the relationship. And so you can see that in that sense, the good dumper is taking responsibility. They just come to a decision that takes them away. The good dumpee actually is in a lot the same place. They may struggle with the relationship, get counseling, work on it. The difference is that they think it can still work. So both take responsibility. Now, the bad dumper is somebody who leaves the relationship, but they leave the relationship by blaming the other person. It's all your fault. If it wasn't for you, if you hadn't done that, things would have been fine. So why should I feel guilty? You're the problem. I'm the solution. I'm leaving. They don't take responsibility. They don't do the work. And of course, what do? They drag all that garbage into the next relationship. What do they say? You're the problem. And then the next relationship, you're the problem. I've talked to people like that, and I say, now you tell me, who's the common denominator in all those relationships? Did all those people that you got married to or related to, did they all come from the same family that had the same background? Or, who was that? And if they're still in the room after I say that, often they get that idea. The bad dumpee is somebody who also doesn't take responsibility. What do? They make things so miserable for the other person. They don't leave the relationship, but they make it so miserable. The other person just has to get out. Then the bad dumpee can go, poor me, I've been dumped. See, so they get the sympathy vote and what they wanted all along. So good dumper, bad dumpee, or bad dumper, bad dumpee, they don't take responsibility, they don't grow and change, they're stuck. Good dumper and good dumpee can recognize, wow, things need to change, I need to take responsibility, and I can move beyond it. So dealing with the rejection and the guilt means, for the dumper, the good dumper, I need not feel so guilty because my partner has the same opportunity to grow and change as I do. And if my partner is willing to work on him or herself like I am, they can move beyond. And for the good dumpee who feels rejection, they can say, that was just one person who left my life. It's not the whole universe. The world isn't ending. I need not feel so horrible because of that. What I need to do is learn from that, grow and move beyond it. That's how you deal with the guilt, deal with the rejection. It's not by denying the feelings, it's by understanding them, by feeling them, by learning from it. That's what's key. So, that's the bottom rung or the bottom row of the pyramid. And we've achieved that. Now we're really opening doors to feelings. Here it is. All right, let's have it. I want to have feelings. I'm ready to have feelings. And the answer is you're going to get them. And for a lot of people, it's the grief. It's the sorrow. It's the hurt. It's the pain. It's the anguish of divorce. As I said, no one gets married to get divorced. And there are so many losses when our relationship ends. It's not just that person leaving. It's the sense of the future of being with that person and what we always wanted. It may be the sense of having a family or what the family was meant to be. It's the loss of free time. Now you're becoming a single parent, or the sense of abandonment that you don't have your children all the time. It's the loss of financial future. The losses can go on and on and on. So there's much to grieve about. And grief, as with all of our feelings, is neither good nor bad. It's just part of who we are. It's what brings color to our lives. And so it's so important to open up to those emotions and be honest with them. As you're able to do that, then you're able to start healing. So many times people are grieving, they don't realize it. And the Fisher Divorce Adjustment Scale, a series of 100 questions to help people understand where they are in their process. One of the grief questions is, I sigh a lot. So people sighing, how do you feel? I'm fine. They're sighing. Another example is that people can't concentrate. They're reading a book and they go over the passage 10 times and they don't know what it says. They put the book down and decide there's a problem with that book. There's no writing in there. I can't read anything. You have some people who, they can't sleep. And of course there's crying. There's the tears. And for those people who hold back the tears, just like when you stuff things with denial, you clog yourself up. When you're holding in an emotion, it's going to come out sideways. For some folks, as they're sitting at work, and they're tight-lipped and they're thinking, I can tough my way through this divorce. And then somebody plays that country western song. And of course, in a country western song, you can't have a country western song without losing your dog, your car, You ever heard that joke where if you play one backwards, you get your car back? So the song is going on, and what's the person doing? Now here comes the tears, and they can't help it. There they are at work, and they're crying, and people are saying, what's wrong with you? I thought you were happy. You were claiming to be happy. And then they get mad at the grief. If it wasn't for grief, I'd be all right. No, the grief is there to help cleanse yourself of the pain. Feeling the hurt does that. In fact, they've done studies to show that your tears have different enzymatic components in them. That if you're crying because you're peeling an onion, your tears have different chemicals than if you're crying because you're laughing at a movie, or crying because you're really angry, or crying because you're really sad. So you can literally poison yourself with chemicals by holding the tears in, rather than releasing them. And I think of what Khalil Gibran said in his book, The Prophet. He said, the cup of our happiness is hollowed out by the flow of our tears. So to the extent we can feel our sorrow, so we can feel the joy in our lives. And that's why when people don't deal with their grief, they wonder why everything is so gray and numb. It's because they're holding it back. Opening the door to your grief can help you open the door to many things. There may be a lot of pain in that, but out of that rawness, there's a sense of wonder and beauty. It's like looking at nature when you're out in nature and you see the way it really is and you feel the cold wind on your cheeks. It stings, but you're alive. And so feeling your grief can help you do that. It can help deepen you as a person. It can help you move through and move on. And when you do that, look what your reward is. Anger. People get angry. In the Rebuilding Seminar, grief is session 3 and anger is session 4. And I've had people ask me, why do you start with grief and then go on to anger? Because some people are so angry, they can't see their grief. In fact, you might think of grief and anger like the twin pillars or like the two mountains, the twin peaks up here of the divorce process. One may be a little higher than the other. And we found it usually works better to start working on the grief. You start working on the grief and you erode that down, and then here's the anger. Sometimes you work on the anger, you erode that down, and sometimes the grief comes back. Sometimes you do them both. I call that granger. Okay, you're pissed and you're crying at the same time. That's okay. Now, there's a lot with this anger rebuilding block. In fact, Dr. Fisher coined a word to talk about the special anger of divorce. He called it angerism. Not just anger, but angerism. And I think the best way to describe it is a story he used to tell from a woman many years ago, back east. She had just been divorced, very acrimonious divorce, been dumped. And the day that she got her final decree, she was driving past the city park. And lo and behold, there in the city park was her just then ex-husband and his new young girlfriend, sunbathing. And she drove up right over the curb and drove right over both of them. Now see, that's angerism. As you sit here and laugh, I know you know what I mean. I've had people ask me, hey, did she back up? They were really getting into the visuals of this, see? But that's the rage of divorce. Again, no one gets married to get divorced. And all the things you can grieve about, you can feel angry about. All those changes that are forced upon you. Even for the dumper who leaves, all those changes of Why didn't this work out? No matter what I tried to do, it didn't work out. But anger is a very energizing emotion. It's one that can help you pick up the pieces of your life and move on. So one can steel you to go out and get that job when you haven't been in the workforce outside the home for many years. It's the one that can help you go and create that household when maybe you've never done that before. It's one that can fortify you when you're becoming a single parent, whether it's every other weekend or most all the time, and you're dealing with the everyday needs of your kids without a partner to help you. Anger can give you that energy to improve your life. Anger can give you the energy to set a boundary, where you hang up that phone instead of being cussed out by your former partner. You won't put up with that anymore. But more than just anger on its surface, there are reasons that we feel anger that are underneath. You see, in a real sense, anger is a secondary emotion. We want to set a boundary against something or someone because underneath we may feel very threatened. We may feel very fearful. We may feel very inadequate or very, very sad. So my suggestion has always been, feel your anger. Deal with it appropriately. Use it to improve your life, but go underneath it. Find out what else is there. And when you find that maybe there's more grief to be worked on, when you get to that grief, anger isn't an issue. So sometimes it's just anger, and sometimes it's other things. But when you understand it and use it, it energizes your life and deepens who you are. And that's, again, part of the promise and the pain of what divorce can bring a person who consciously moves through it. And of course, when you're moving through your divorce process, a major aspect of it is what Dr. Fisher called letting go, disentangling, what I call cutting heartstrings. You see, just because you've changed your address doesn't mean that you've let go. There are a lot of people whose partners have died and they're still hanging on. Although I had one woman once say, I think it's easier when they die because they don't keep coming back on you, like when you get a divorce. So, to cut those heartstrings, to let go means you stop carrying a torch in some ways for that person or framing your life around that ended relationship. Remember, I had a woman once who said, well, I realized that after we got a divorce, I couldn't go to this restaurant anymore. I couldn't go hiking on this trail. I don't ever want to see that movie again or hear that song. Because anytime she did or heard those things, it reminded her of her partner. So she was cutting off parts of her life. See, that's not letting go. She could spend the rest of her life doing that, and some people do, in a lot of bitterness. What you need to do is take a look at those things. Deal with the grief, deal with the anger, deal with the fact that the relationship is over. Not only accept it, even though you don't like it, but start building a life beyond it. And one woman, she had separated to get her divorce was around the holiday season, so that always makes it tough. But the next year it was so sad and devastating because it reminded everybody, her and the kids, of what had happened. So the second anniversary of that separation, she decided to do something different. On a whim, she pasted the Christmas tree on the ceiling. Now it's hanging upside down. It was one of those fake trees that had all the ornaments on it, So now it's hanging upside down, right? What did they discover? Well, there were plenty more room for the presents. The kids loved it, and the dog couldn't pee on the tree anymore. So you see, there's a lot of benefits to disentangling from your divorce. But the core of it really is, as I say, cutting heartstrings. It's letting go of not just that person, but the sense of self that you created by being with that person. You see, when people get involved in a love relationship, they blend their sense of self with their partner. So when their partner leaves, it's like, what do I do with who I am now? And what's important is to bring that sense of self back to yourself. Not leave it hanging out there, hoping that person will come back, or leaving it hanging out there, hoping that somebody else will plug in and take care of your pain. The folks who do that just reenact the same pain over and over again. It comes back to learning to care about yourself. And as you do so, you're transforming your life, and you're being in the best place possible to create new relationships, however you choose to do that. So, time doesn't do this. You need to do it. Dealing with the grief and anger are the important steps in cutting those heartstrings. The whole issue around self-worth, while this rebuilding block is in the second tier, it really, all the other rebuilding blocks revolve around this. Because divorce is a self-worth issue. I mean, heck, life is a self-worth issue, right? how you define yourself and who you are and what's going on. And part of that definition, the evaluation of it is emotionally, is your self-worth. So if you invest in a relationship and give all your worth to the other person, what do you have left when it ends? I remember I had one woman say proudly in class, she said, I gave 100% to my partner. And I said, well, how much did you give to yourself? Well, I do the math, you know. So she was asking her partner to relate to her when she wasn't relating to her. And what does that do for a relationship? It's not a healthy one. So how you treat yourself, what your image is, what you believe your worth is as a person, if it's based on only being in a relationship, see how you're overloading the relationship to define who you are. That's far different than being a person who comes to share within a relationship. And the healthier you are, the more you can stand on your own 2 feet, the better judgments you can make about the people you're going to relate with. So everything you learn during this divorce crisis, all the feelings you go through, all that understanding is going to boil down to how do you define your self-image and your sense of self and the feelings of self-worth that come out of that. And you know, I've had people go through the rebuilding class devastated in the beginning, and by the end I had to restrain them from sending a thank you note to their ex-husband or ex-wife. I say, no, you know, that could be a problem legally, don't do that. But I want to send a thank you note. I'm so happy. If this hadn't happened, I wouldn't be the person I am today. Well, and that's true. It has to do with your growth and your commitment to that growth. And what you learn from that means, no matter what happens in your life, you have the resiliency to maintain a positive self-image and high self-worth, even in painful times. And what a gift that is, truly. Well, now we come to the next cornerstone of the pyramids up here, and that's the transition rebuilding block. Now, when you started dealing and been successful looking at and understanding what the major emotions there are, the fear, the rejection, guilt, the grief, and anger, you begin to start opening the door to not just what it means to lose or have a love relationship end, but to what your life has been all along, to what I've done and what I have yet to do. And Dr. Fisher's theory of the shall rebel love, which I think is second only to his rebuilding block theory, in my opinion, really lays out how a person has either progressed or not progressed in their life. For example, you think of a child growing up. They're in the shell stage, they have no sense of themselves, don't have an identity, and growing up in their family, they're one of the children, and they're a sibling, and they grow to have friends. And part of their development in life is to move beyond that shell stage and gain a sense of themselves. And of course, that's called being a teenager, right? And that's where all the rebellion comes in. A teenager's job is to individuate, to move beyond. So they push against their parents and rebel, do things their parents don't like, so that they can then finally move off and have their own identity. And in this theory, it's having their identity becoming into the love stage, hopefully as a mature grown-up, so that they can then make choices for themselves and relate appropriately with their peers and their family. Well, wouldn't it be nice if a little bell would ring when people are 21, ding, you can legally drink and you're now mature and will act that way forever. Unfortunately, I've got to find that bell. Something has happened to it. Because that doesn't happen. Maturity is not a function of age. So what do you have? You have a lot of people who are grown up in age and they're still shell folks. They're still like little kids. They're the ones who go around and say, here, take care of me, or I got to find somebody to take care of. They're the over-responsible, under-responsible. Or they might get stuck in the rebellion stage. Their identity is pushing against you. So look what happens here. See this, okay? So now you have a person who's in the shell stage, and they get involved with somebody who's in the rebellion stage, right? It's classic, because the shell stage person is always trying to put a lid on the rebellion stage person, and that causes that person always to push back. You know, and that becomes then a marriage made in hell. And many times people don't understand that until they get a divorce and they go, oh, that's what's going on. Usually they understand it by going, oh, now I see what their problem was. And of course, for those of us who teach the rebuilding class, we say, yes, absolutely. And if that was their problem, what was yours? And usually what people find is, and I've had some people say, God, you know, I've been in the shell stage my entire life. Yeah, people in their 50s, mid-50s. I don't know who I am. And of course that means, wow, how exciting. Now you can open the doors and find out. So transition means I'm not just moving beyond the ending of this love relationship. I'm moving into a whole new way of being in my life. I'm growing up. I'm becoming who I've been, who I needed to be all along. And that's what I think life is all about. Moving from the shell stage, becoming a sense of rebellion to find out who I am, and moving to a sense of loving acceptance of myself and others. When you're able to start seeing that and achieving that, then you can start working toward having healthier relationships, starting with yourself. And believe me, it really puts into context all that's happened before. Okay, we're moving up. We're getting closer to freedom. And what do we see? Openness. Openness. Another word for that could be authenticity. Especially people who've been in the shell stage find that they spent their whole life hiding behind a mask, pretending and trying to be who other people wanted them to be. You know, often codependents are that way. How many of you have heard that term, codependent? Yeah. My favorite definition of codependent is somebody who, when they're dying, somebody else's life flashes before their eyes. Because they haven't lived theirs. They know what you're thinking and feeling, but they have no idea what they're thinking and feeling. So they wear masks. They wear masks toward other people. Oh, I'm happy, when they're not. They wear masks toward themselves. Oh, I'm a terrible person, when they're not. And so learning to become yourself inside and out, becoming authentic, really is a lifelong quest. And the thing is about your divorce, when it seems to cut everything to the quick, it helps you open all that up to see the different layers and go, okay, this was real, this wasn't, I don't want to do that anymore. And you start answering the question, okay, who am I now? I see people when they start the rebuilding class, it's really interesting. Because they're in a lot of pain, but in the outside world, they're trying to act they're okay. So they're wearing this mask, I'm okay. Right? And when you're at work, you need to do that. But when you're with your friends, you need to take that down. So we help people see that. But what's interesting is that toward the end of the class, when they start feeling really good inside, when they're around their friends, they put an I'm sad mask on because they don't want people to know they're really kind of happy now that their divorce has happened and they're moving on. So being authentic means understanding what's going on inside, really recognizing what that is for you, and then sharing that appropriately with those around you. Because if you can't be authentic with yourself and authentic with other people, how are you going to have an authentic relationship of any kind? Such an important door to open. And having openness inside and out can help us do that. Well, what about this one? What about love? Or as I have it there, unlovable. Because that's usually the way people feel when their relationship ends. I'm unlovable. Even deeper, I'm unlovable. I'm not able to love. I don't know how to love. I thought I knew what love was, but look what happened. But what this does is that when you look and deal with your divorce process appropriately, it helps you reach out and see that, you know, I've been looking out there for something that I first need to find in here. And for many people, that means evaluating and reevaluating what they've learned about love. How it works, how it doesn't work. You know, love is much more than an emotion. Love are the behaviors that help build the bonds between two people. They're the behaviors and their thoughts and the feelings that help you connect in authentic ways with yourself. So finding love outside in your life has to start with you finding love within yourself. Valuing yourself. Caring for yourself in ways that shows that. Because it's from that place then, it's like having an antenna. You not only can learn to receive, but also to send out the signals that connect in loving ways with other people. Many times people find that the love they thought they had in their relationships is really very selfish. And then to start taking responsibility for that and recognize, you know, there need to be certain things for me to give my heart to someone else or to spend my time with someone else. But I need to do that in a way that both honors and respects myself and the other person. So love begins within. Love begins at home. Now what about this one? Trust. Trust is a huge issue, especially for those who are getting a divorce, whose relationships are ending. It's very natural in the beginning of that process to recognize, I can't trust anybody. I can't trust you. I can't trust me. I don't know what trust means. I thought I did, but forget it. And people who are getting a divorce are notoriously untrustworthy. They say, well, I'll meet you there and we'll get together and we'll have dinner, and then they don't show up. I'll get those tickets and we can whatever, and they don't buy them and it doesn't happen. Because they're real skittish. And that's okay. What's important is to recognize in the beginning, you're not trustworthy. Everything's turned upside down. It's hard to tell which way is up. But if you want to find trust in other people, because usually people spend a lot of time blaming others not being trustworthy, it comes back to starting by being trustworthy yourself, so that you get those tickets, you make that commitment, and you get there and you be there. And when you start becoming a trustworthy person, it's amazing what happens. You look out there and find, if I can be trusted, I bet there's other people out there who can be trusted too. And that opens up huge doors, amazing doors. Because as much as there's angst and hurt and pain and betrayal in this world, there's a lot more love, trust, and beauty. And it's the time that we stopped and opened our eyes to that, understood what the behaviors of that are for us and what they are from other people. And it's when that meets that we start creating the relationship that matters. And you talk about relationship, you have to talk about this next rebuilding block, relatedness. That's a term that, as I recall, Dr. Fisher played with somewhat. How do you describe relating without being in a relationship? How do you describe relating without being in a committed connection? And that's what this is, relatedness. It's a time when people get to a place where, okay, I've dealt with the grief and the anger, and I'm kind of over the rejection, and I want to put my little, not my big toe, I'll just kind of get my little toe in the water there, and it's kind of hard to get it out there because I have a small little toe, but I'm going to try it. And so they go on a coffee date, right? And they show up. And they leave after 4 minutes because they figure, oh, he's not coming, she's not going to be there. They're out the door. But they tried it. And the next time they stay there, and they have, half a cup of coffee or whatever, and they talk. And that can graduate into making some sort of romantic connections or dating, those types of things. And they offer a little bit, and there's a little bit of pain, and that hurts, and they go, well, now, wait a minute. This is different than what it was before. I'm kind of doing this a little bit more awareness. It feels kind of strange, it's kind of scary, but I can learn that I can talk to a man or talk to a woman, and we actually have a lot more in common than I thought we would have. And that's building relatedness. That's exploring healthy connections. And as you do that, really what you're doing is learning about yourself. Oh, I really like this, or that's exciting, or I'm never going to do that again. Gives you that opportunity. And when you feel good enough and you open that door, you begin to realize, I've really come a long way from the ending of my relationship, because I'm starting to take risks again. And while that's still scary, it feels good. And usually what happens at this point is that people want to take maybe even more risks. And as they move up into that second to the last tier, they find, oh my God, there's that issue, sexuality. Sexuality, more than just sex, but you can say sexuality, most people hear just sex. The uality kind of goes out the window. That's okay, because you got to deal with all of it. And there are 3 stages of sexuality when we talk about the ending of a love relationship. And it's important to understand those and to acknowledge them and admit them and decide, okay, this is where I'm at, because then that helps me know where I've been and where I need to go. The first stage is what we call the depressive stage. What I mean by that is that we're dealing with so much of the grief and the hurt that we don't have a lot of energy for our sexuality. We don't have a lot of energy to be physically intimate with somebody. So it's kind of like, for some people it's like, nah, it's the furthest thing from my mind. And that's probably healthy to stand back from that, to care for yourself in other ways. For other people, they go in the other direction. So, I got to be with somebody. I'm feeling so much pain, I got to have somebody to just, put me back together. So maybe they wind up in a one-night stand situation, and the woman's unresponsive, and the man has difficulties, and all of a sudden they think, that's going too. And it confirms that they've been damaged and they're ruined forever. And of course, the danger there is nothing physical, it's psychological, and that can become a block. That's why it's important for people to recognize that that kind of lack of responsiveness is appropriate when you're in that situation. And it doesn't last forever. So what happens then is when people work on the emotions and things we've been talking about, then they get into the second stage. And it's kind of like, it's like now outside. Springtime, here comes the flowers, I got to bounce on my step, hey, I'm ready to go, and they're involved in what we call the horny stage. Now I don't know if you could say that's a clinical term, but in this context, we'll take it as it is. Because it happens. They're there, they're suddenly excited, they don't feel as inhibited as they did, and their body's up and ready to go. And that can really clash with some people's sense of morality. So there's a struggle there. And of course, sometimes people take some risks that are unnecessary, and that can be dangerous. But what's important is that there's a stirring inside, and there's an openness that are people ready to go. And it's important to acknowledge that, whether or not you act on it. It's also important to realize that that horny stage doesn't last forever. Now, I remember one time I said that, and the guy in the back of the room went, shucks. It doesn't last forever in the sense that as you continue growing through your process, you get to the more stable, the stability stage around sexuality, which means because you felt your grief, you've worked through your anger, because you're dealing with these issues, you've deepened yourself as a person. You've deepened yourself as a sexual being. You have a lot more emotional connections to make with other people, not just physical ones. And at that extent, at that point then, you're able to make decisions about how you want to connect with people. What that means for you. You have a better sense for what is my morality and my values now. How is it that I want to experiment? What do I want to do in this newness of myself? But to do it in a healthier way. And that can be a freeing up for some people that they never got to prior to that. It's another thing about divorce. Now, I wouldn't suggest that people get divorced to help their sexuality, but by golly, if that's happening to you, why not? This next rebuilding block is one of my favorite ones. As you notice there, the word singleness fills up the whole block, because that's what happens. When you've dealt with the loneliness issue, as I talked about, and some of the other things, you come to a sense of solidity in who you are as a single human being. Basically what you're saying is, gosh, I recognize that no matter what goes on in my life, no matter what relationships that I have, love relationships, friendships, family, the only relationship I'm guaranteed to be in for the rest of my life is the one with myself. So I want to develop that. I want to share that. I want to share that with myself and have it overflow in connecting with other people. And that's what singleness is. Singleness means that I'm establishing my identity in a way that no relationship is ever going to take it away. I may share it in a relationship, and that may enrich who I am, but I'm not going to lose it in a relationship. Which always reminds me of the famous wedding vow, and the two shall become one. Whenever I hear that, I look around desperately for a barf bag, because it makes me desperately ill. Because why would you want to give up yourself to be with somebody else? Would you want to create something with that person so that it's more than the sum of the parts? Singleness is the attitude that you have that helps you get there. And with the sense of singleness, you can open up to what is my new meaning in life? What is my purpose in life now? If I've discovered all the sense of color and joy, even through the pain that I've experienced, divorce has caused me to have to reevaluate what are some of the goals that I have. Where do I want to be 6 months from now? Where do I want to be a year from now, 5 years from now? Why am I here? You begin to see beyond just being in a love relationship and what that's been, into a whole larger sense of being part of this life relationship that we share. What is my purpose in life? And understanding that can be a wonderful way for you to take the turmoil that is your divorce and grow a garden out of it. I remember one woman did an anger exercise where she tore up all her pictures of her ex-husband, and she put it and tilled it into her garden and planted perennial bulbs, and it was just great. So that's different than the person who put a picture of her ex on her tire and drove on the way to work every day. So his face would fall apart. But that was a good anger exercise for her, so that worked. She got beyond that for her purpose also. So finally, all this brings us up then to our sense of freedom. Free to be my new self. Free to make the choices that I want to make. Free to know that no matter what happens to me, I will not only survive, I'll thrive. Because if I can deal with this situation, I can deal with anything. And you know, many times people have asked, why is it in this whole system there's no rebuilding block about kids? And Dr. Fisher would always say, the best thing you can do for your kids is to get your own act together. And I would add, share with them what you're doing appropriate to their age. They see, you know, it reminds me of the man who was just sitting there crying about his divorce situation, not blaming his ex, but just feeling his tears. And his children came and gathered around him, and they cried too. And it allowed them all to release and to let go. Or the woman who was very, very angry. And she stated that she was angry. Again, she wasn't cussing at her ex-husband, but she took a pillow and started beating on the floor. She said, I'm just feeling angry. And by God, the little kids, 2-year-old, 3-year-old, all the rest of them brought the pillows, and they wound up beating the pillows and had this great big pillow fight. And it released, and they dissolved in giggles when it was all done, but it released all that tension and that hurt. It helps the kids to see it's okay to have these feelings. Here's how you deal with them. Here's how you feel afterwards. Here's how you move on. And of course, for parents who do that, and I think it's been so exciting over the years when we've had in different classes, both parents take the class. So they both understand and work through that process. The kids are so much better off because they have two parents who are being authentic with themselves, with the reality of what's happened, what worked and didn't work, but also the reality of being able to move on. It frees the children not to have to take care of the parents. It frees the children and teaches them to be able to deal with their own feelings so they don't act out in school. And it frees the family then to be able to move on, whether that's in a single parent situation or possibly in a step-parent situation, because then people aren't dragging the garbage of the past into the future. So the best thing you can do for your kids is to get your own act together. It's just like, you know, they tell you when you're on an airplane, you know, if the oxygen masks come down, put yours on first before helping your kid. I want to make a couple of comments about the rebuilding seminar, because I think it's important to understand how these rebuilding blocks work in action in that program. It's a 10-session program, typically meets once per week for 2.5 to 3 hours per session. It's a mixture of large group and small group interaction. The first session discusses these rebuilding blocks and starts building the group. The second session takes a look at the adaptation patterns. What are the healthy and the unhealthy patterns that people bring into their relationships? And helps them move beyond the denial by understanding what they are and what they need to change. Then the next 2 sessions deal with these major emotions. First it's grief, and then it's anger. Reaching to get a sense of forgiveness, which is so important. And see, people get stuck in their process when they don't forgive. Maybe it's not forgiving themselves. When I say forgiveness, I'm not talking about that it's okay that what happened happened. What it means is that I'm not carrying it around anymore. I felt the feelings, I've let it go, I'm moving on. That's so important. Session 5 is on self-worth, dealing with the loss of self-esteem, and connecting with others in the class, which is so life-giving to help us see the true esteem that we ought to have for ourselves. And then the second half of the class really helps us move on beyond the heavy pain of divorce. We'll look at transitions, discuss that shower bell love construct of Dr. Fisher's. We'll look at openness, what are masks that sabotage intimacy, and how we can remove them. We'll take a look at building self-love. Session 9, we'll look at relatedness, and friendship as the foundation for all relationships. And then finally on session 10, which usually at this point, people build a lot of good friendships, and session 10 gets really kind of crazy anyway, because we kind of celebrate the growth that people have done. So we've decided, you know, if it's going to be crazy, we'll put talking about sexuality in session 10 too, so it's crazy all the way along. We have a lot of fun, though, talking about the opinions of what it means to be a newly single person with our new life. A core part of the program is the Fisher Divorce Adjustment Scale. It's something that Dr. Fisher created in 1976 along with the rebuilding blocks. It's the industry standard for people understanding and evaluating the ending of their love relationship. There are 6 subtests: self-worth, disentanglement, grief, anger, social intimacy, social self-worth. The scale helps you understand where you are and where you still need to grow. And one of the things that's exciting, it shows that in the rebuilding seminar, using this scale, people tend to grow in the 10 weeks of the class what it would take about a year for people to do on their own. So It's a statistically valid instrument that helps people grow. It helps them grow by, in the beginning, seeing where they are, and at the end, seeing how much growth they've made. So that kind of gives you an idea of what the rebuilding blocks to healing are, how this process works, and as I say, you can apply it not just to a divorce or relationship ending situation, but any relationship ending or any ending crisis. It could be death, could be moving, could be anything. Life is change, and as we learn how to adapt to that change, and more than adapt, grow through the changes, we become not only a more effective and happier person, but we become someone who can contribute in a much more positive way to the lives of everyone around us. And that's based on the choices you decide to make right now and in the future. So I encourage you to look into this process, these programs, to possibly even take this assessment to help you see where you are, where you can go from here. I'm the education coordinator for rebuildingwhenyourrelationshipends.com. And we provide this testing to help you see what's going on. I have an interpretive guidebook that will help you see what steps you need to take as you've seen your scores. And then we can hook you up either online with a DVD series or with an in-person seminar so you can have the rebuilding experience and become part of this 600,000 plus family throughout the world that have rebuilt themselves and move on to a healthier and happier life. I guess to sum up, I would say, turn your relationship ending crisis into a time of healing and growth. It's up to you. No one can do this for you. No parent, no partner, no friend. But with support and guidance, you can do it just as hundreds of thousands have done before you. So whatever you do, I encourage you to take this with you and make it a part of who you are moving into your new life. Thank you.